the voice of sanity amidst all the noise. We have none other than the very, very celebrated Professor Jagdish Bhagwati with us right here on ET Now. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us.
Thank you.
You come to India at a very interesting time. The opposition and the ruling benches seem to be completely submerged in a discussion over the GST. We're still nowhere close to a resolution. Early signs that this may go through the winter session. My first question to you, sir, is how hopeful you are of the GST passing the parliament test, because there's been such an acrimonious relationship between the opposition and the government on one hand. It's beginning to make amends, but how hopeful are you?
I think the Prime Minister was facing a problem very similar to President Obama's, which is that both of them felt they had to do what we call ordinances and what is called in America executive action, because they were facing a legislative roadblock to whatever they wanted to do, which seemed quite sensible, particularly when they had been elected to change and transform the system. It's a bit of a major problem in the Indian situation, because there was it was quite possible that the Prime Minister, with this huge majority that he had, would feel that his agenda should be implemented, but then he faces roadblock in the Rajya Sabha.
That's right, yes.
And so I think what he's decided, I think he could have tried to stick to the original agenda, which is to say, here I am introducing ordinances and so on, and making it, and let the opposition, which is really emasculated when you think about it, compared to the American Republicans. He could have said, I'm just going to ignore them. But I think after the Bihar election, he, I think, changed his mind and said, look, rather than rely just on ordinances, it is probably going to be more difficult now, rather than less, to have the ordinances sustained and to have it, done purely through executive action.
Yes.
And so he, I think, reached out, even though this is an emasculated opposition. I mean, it's hardly, I mean,
it's emasculated certainly in the Lok Sabha, but you can't say the same
but
about
not
the
in the Rajya Sabha.
Yes. And that is where the legislative logjam is.
That's the problem. So I think what he's decided after the Bihar election is to reach out and see if he can get this opposition, which, as I said, is emasculated in the Lok Sabha, and it's been discredited, in my view,
that's right,
politically, to reach out to them and sort of make them feel important, and hopefully get the better people within that party.
So what you're essentially saying is that this is a very well thought out political strategy by the Prime Minister and his men. It's come perhaps a little too late. He could have been a little more reconciliatory in the past, and we would have perhaps seen...
But he didn't need to be, because you see, the point is, it was an emasculated thing. It was very likely, he really thought that he would win Bihar.
That's
and
right.
he didn't, you see. So a smart politician has to react to how the situation develops. If Bihar had been won by him, you can be sure he would not have reached out in the way in which he is doing now.
That's right.
So I think this is what I find interesting about the Prime Minister, is that he's flexible. People say he's not. But
he's showing flexibility here.
But that's his political propaganda. Every experience I've had with him, he shows enormous flexibility, ability to get information and react to it.
How do you expect the opposition to react this time around? You're absolutely right. They are reduced to nothing in the Lok Sabha. It's the Rajya Sabha where there is a problem. The Prime Minister is now reaching out. It's obviously a part of a very well thought out strategy. Do you expect the opposition to continue to be obstructionist, or do you expect them to budge from their stance, considering they cannot be seen as obstructionist on a reform as big as GST?
I think you're absolutely right on that. I don't think they can afford to be seen to be obstructionists. And I think what they also are therefore under pressure to accommodate. Now, when you look at what they're doing on the GST, it is basically to worry about whether you should have 1% additional tax or less. This is a matter of detail. Basically, it's the government which has to decide the rate.
That's
it
right.
is not a constitutional issue, like the opposition is making out. So I think that flexibility is inherent in running a government. And at that point, you do consult a lot of people. Like, what do you think? Because that's the best way to learn if there are any problems with what you're doing. But to discuss whether, in fact, there should be a 1% surcharge or not, I mean, it's absurd on the part of the opposition to be worrying about that sort of thing. So my feeling is that the government, you know, Mr. Jaitley, etc., will in fact agreeable to discussing this issue. And as long as you've got people like Dr. Manmohan Singh on the other side, who's basically the guy who's going to be consulted, because, you know, as I was watching the constitutional debate, my reaction was, you know, most of the people in the opposition also, they can't even spell constitution. It's too long a word.
But if I may just continue on the GST, you know, what we're picking up right now is that there could be 3 or several rates in the GST. It may not be one uniform rate that may apply to everything. There may be a sin tax or a tax on super luxury. Is that the way to go forward? I know we don't need to get into the details of what the government needs to do, but GST, the whole idea is to make India a uniform tax market. Is that counterproductive?
But you can have a uniform tax market, but at different rates for different classes of goods. But this is the curse of India, that any simplicity is no one wants to think of even when we were liberalizing on imports, they wanted different rates for different types of goods and so on. Anytime anybody wants to simplify something and really clarify the system, they put in all kinds of riders, and that is what worries me. This is a foot in the door. I mean, in principle, you can say you should tax luxuries more.
That's right.
But who's going to define a luxury? And the point is, it is a politically defined thing. And pretty soon it opens the door to all kinds of exemptions and so on. So it's a foot in the door problem, which I worry. Just go ahead and clean it out.
I have a quick question to ask of you, sir, because, you know, a lot of people say that the Prime Minister and his government should realize they have been given the mandate by the people. They have a 281 in the Lok Sabha now. You know, they should go ahead with reforms outside of Parliament. Let executive decisions be taken. My question is a little contrarian. Do you believe executive decisions can make up for legislative action that only Parliament can do?
No, but this is a dilemma, you see, that both the US President and the Prime Minister, when they've faced problems of having their policies adopted, despite having considerable support from the people, right, in terms of personal popularity and so on. So I think it is inevitable that the executive will want to move. We have different problems from that of the United States. So I think that is something where I personally feel that we really ought to give more to executive action. Now, it is interesting because lawyers are just like economists. Since the President of the United States is a Democrat, the progressive lawyers want him to have the executive action.
Right.
Over here, since the Prime Minister is supposed to be market-oriented, the progressive lawyers don't want to give him that discretion. So, but the point is, in the end, faced with legislative blocks, you will move in this direction. But in the end, for stability of the system, you have to be able to say, look, the next guy comes in, okay? Supposing the US President loses or the Prime Minister. Then if it is only executive action or ordinances, it can be reversed very easily. But so you have to work to make sure that whatever executive action you do, in the end gets endorsed by the legislature, because that makes it more stable. You can't reverse it or undermine it just through a change of government.
Professor Bhagwati, you've been a very keen watcher of India. You've tracked the performance of this government and many governments in the past. Let me ask you a very frank question. About 18 months down the line since Mr. Modi took office, do you believe the honeymoon period is over and the government has lost the opportunity, if I may, of what we call the big bang structural reforms? Is that something?
I think a lot of people say that the Prime Minister came in with the promise, after he had such a huge majority, probably the best in the world, without any assassination or anything like that, riding on that wave which Rajiv Gandhi had and so on. So this was his own personal success. Now, given that, some people feel that he could have introduced a variety of ordinances to get it going, right? And it would have been very difficult for the Congress party at that stage,
to stall it.
To stall it even in Rajya Sabha, that he missed an opportunity and that he was misadvised by bureaucrats. That's it's a matter of political judgment, and you could argue on both sides. But I think if he'd arrived with a blitzkrieg of ordinances across a whole range of issues, I think it could have led to a reaction the other way, because ultimately we are a democracy. We cannot really ride roughshod over the process.
Class, yes.
So I think that's exaggerated. Of course, I think the only problem with him has been that the bureaucracy is inevitably status quo oriented, and they have to just, after all, they were associated with the previous set of policies.
That's right.
So when they're advising him,
they would not want to
they're not going to say we were suggesting crazy things or endorsing crazy things. So somewhere I said I mean, you do have to, I think, get around this problem, because we can't do without bureaucrats. I mean,
right, yeah.
they're the life and blood of the system. But I think what you do have to think of is, how do you bring in outside blood in a way which doesn't really undermine the bureaucratic structure, because if you do, they are bound to stall it.
That's a very important point that you raised, because many people had this high hope that when Mr. Modi comes to power, there will be lateral induction of talent, and more so because there is a dearth of talent in this government. There isn't, So many people had thought there'll be lateral induction of talent. One of the people who was, I think, one of the only people who was brought in was Arvind Panagaria at the Niti Aayog. One wonders, is the Prime Minister ill-advised on this? Why did he not go that way? And is there any more scope to then laterally induct talent right now?
But you see, I think when he comes in from a state, like any state, Gujarat was well administered and a success, but when you're trying to scale it up, when you get there, then he's got to rely on the new bureaucrats, because take the international trade negotiations on the Doha round. He goofed up on that. But who was it? It's such a complex issue that even the economists don't understand it for. You really have to know the ins and outs.
Right.
And so what does he do? I mean, he's got to listen to his bureaucrats, you see. So we lost a lot of reputation on that and a lot of momentum. Then I think, while I think the minister is actually very competent and very charming, Sitaram, but she's not into trade, and she doesn't have the kind of expertise to be able to run it, you see. So you really need people who are going to come and help her. But he's the only one who can say, look, you're an important member of my team.
But you've got to follow the agenda that I want.
Yeah, and you have to bring in whichever Arvind you want. There's so many Arvinds now. There's a story about the Prime Minister saying to his secretary,
get me
Arvind. And so he didn't have the courage to say which Arvind, so he collected all of them.
One of the criticism about this government, and one of the criticisms is there is too much centralization of power. Ministers are perhaps not authorized enough, not empowered enough. Again, is that something that bothers you? Because you've seen how governments in the past have functioned, and one of the reasons why things have slowed down is people say that because there is so much of centralization of power in the PMO, things are bound to slow down.
Yeah, but I don't think that's really the heart of the problem, because ultimately you have to have some coordinating mechanism. You can't completely outsource to all the different ministries. People have to come together. Like once I asked him, and I think I said that on another interview, I mean, how do you, people say that you are basically centralizing too much. He said, no, in fact, I consult a lot of people. And like for Gujarat famine, when the earthquake happened, he said, I brought in the top district collectors, because they're close to the ground, and gave them complete autonomy to experiment, but to come every weekend and interact with the rest of the people. So, and I've heard from people who are ambassadors, like in China, that when he came in as a chief minister, he would always, first he would make everybody get up in the morning rather than go off to see the Great Wall and so on and enjoy themselves. And then in the last day, the ambassador told me, you can guess who he was, that he had a whole set of questions and written in his hand, and on China,
And those were
China
asked.
that, and he wanted to know from the ambassador what exactly he should think. So what he does is take under advisement, which is the only way you can have leadership. But then he makes up his mind. But I don't think it is correct to say, as the opposition does, that he's a one-man show. And I think he's not a one-man show in that sense.
Right, right.
But he provides leadership, and I think he's been stymied by, by the fact that he lost the Bihar and before that Delhi,
Right.
and it sort of interrupted, maybe it's undermined
Modi
his,
magic,
and
so to
undermined his confidence in being able to ram things through.
18 months into this government, are you dissatisfied? Are you satisfied? Or is this what you had expected?
This is what I had expected. You see, like my wife is a well-known expert on Russia.
That's right.
You see, so the question is, should shock therapy, meaning rapid change, be the way you do it? She's a gradualist, and I am, and particularly in a democratic context, you can't ride roughshod.
That's right.
And because if you do that, you can have unanticipated reaction. So it seems to me that I didn't expect much more rapid change. And remember, you're going from, you're undertaking massive changes, or at least planning to. That's what you've been voted in for.
That's right.
Now, there you can't really rush ahead, because if you do that, nobody knows what the reaction would be, right?
Fair
Because
point.
so I think you have to, as long as it's
So
moving
he
in
has
the
to be
right,
a gradualist,
and
really,
as long as it's moving in the right direction,
which you think he is.
which I think he is.
I want to ask you something that's really taken a lot of headline space in India, and a lot of global thinkers, commentators, opinion makers have spoken about
Right.
this. This whole rise of the intolerance levels in India, the
Right.
whole intolerance debate. What do you make of this? I mean, you have the advantage of being somebody who can look at things objectively because you're looking at things from the outside
Right.
while having a finger on the spice. So how do you...
Yeah, I think I believe in fundamental freedom of speech. I myself have exercised it.
And sometimes paid a price for it.
Well, it doesn't matter because,
Right.
as long as you, personal integrity requires that you don't go around adjusting what you say depending on which way political wind is blowing. So that doesn't bother me one bit. But I think it seems to me that in the end, people in public life should be a bit more careful. I mean, like the current controversy over Amir Khan. In my view, instead of just saying that, my family feels this way, he should, given his status in public life, he should have said, look, does this make sense for us to worry like this about intolerance and so on? And that is really what he needs, people need to do, because people just keep repeating. You remember on intolerance towards Christians, and many, including the Archbishop and all sorts of people, and Ribeiro, etc., said Christians are being attacked. So I looked into it because, and then I found that, because I went to a Catholic school, as you know, and so I'm pro-Catholic and so on. I'm not pro-Vatican, but I'm pro-Catholic. Because Vatican is another institution, which is something else. So I think it seems to me that I found nothing, no evidence at all. So I wrote that. Then the Hindu said, we won't publish such a thing, although they'd always publish everything. Right. And so I sent it to Mint, and then it became a big, big hit. But I was not, so I was going to say, look, I don't get into these things usually, as you know, but in this case, I really wanted to see if there was in fact anything against Christians, and there was no evidence at all.
I'll tell you why there
the
is...
same way, it seems to me that I think, I would say that is a model we should apply to public figures. They should not, instead of reproducing, everybody says this and so on, and everybody feels...
I completely buy your point about public figures, because they're opinion makers and they have to be far more careful with what they say in public, and that gets carried and that gets kind of disseminated.
And do the homework necessary.
Yes, absolutely. I buy your point about public figures. I think the problem in India is, and why this debate really came about, is that while the right wing went on a rampage, and there are only a handful of people in the right wing who did, it was the failure failure of the government and particularly the Prime Minister to rein them in. Do you think he should have done that more proactively than he did?
No, but we don't have that kind of system. Like I know the earlier Prime Minister. He's not a pro-communist. I'm Dr. Manmohan.
That's right, yes.
I've known him for 60 years, and I know he's pro-growth and pro-reforms and so on. But they had to have a coalition with the communists from Bengal. So what does he do? I mean, none of them ever condemned anything from the communists. So I don't expect that we don't have the system where you exercise a whip and shut up people.
You don't think Prime Minister Modi could have done that?
No, he can't. What can he do? I mean, because I think what he did in the case, Dadri case, I mean, as I've said before in some other programs, is that he should have reached out to the family and asked them to come and visit him or something. In the meantime, remember, he's got to get the facts right. After all, he's the Prime Minister.
That's right.
So 2 weeks, 3 weeks doesn't matter in the sense that, you know, in our country, even more so in other countries, you have to get the facts right.
Exactly.
Because how do we know what happened? I mean, what happened? We know that the poor family, I mean, the guy was
lynched.
Was lynched. The lynch is hardly the word I would use in the sense that suggests a minority being and being strung up from a tree. But we should just have murdered, extrajudicial murder, and that's what it is. So I think he's got to collect the fact. In the meantime, what he did was to get Arun Jaitley, who's number 2, to actually issue a statement right away. And so I think you can easily go wrong if you just rush in with statements. But what he could have shown was more sympathy for the family.
So you don't question the prolonged silence of the Prime Minister?
No, I don't. Because this is, you know, I think one of the things he lacks is a proper press secretary. Because when something like this happens, the press secretary usually comes out and says, look, let's not rush to judgment. The Prime Minister is very concerned and this and that and so on. And so that takes the sting off the delay.
That's right, yeah.
But a Prime Minister, supposing he rushes in, condemns something, and it turns out that the facts are not quite
wrong,
what they are. And then he looks more like, so I think that is the, some circumspection at the very top is necessary, but he's got to have somebody explaining to the press, not be against the press, because the press is quite correctly raising these issues. Say that, look, this is what we are looking into. In
hindsight, do you believe the Prime Minister needs to be a little more accessible than he is?
I don't know about that. I mean,
he's accessible to people like you.
No, he's not. I haven't seen him this time. He's busy.
But
and there's no point going and doing a darshan and so on.
That's right,
At this point, if you have something to say and so on.
True.
So it seems to me that, I mean, it's not, I cannot judge from outside, you know, whether he's accessible or not. But this is always the case with all prime ministers and presidents. The access to them is controlled by people, you know.
All around them.
Oh, exactly. And the way I got around it was because
you're a smart cookie, if I may.
Aside from that, I used to joke that, you know, my friend Arvind Panagaria is now the Prime Minister's advisor.
Right.
So I said, Panagaria is the right ear of the Prime Minister, and I have Panagaria's Prime Minister's ear.
On it.
So by, you know, indirectly I have the Prime Minister's right ear, but I also know him, so I also have his left ear. So I have both his ears. Even then, I don't see any point in wasting his time.
I'm going to ask you.
I mean, Prime Ministers and Presidents are very busy people.
That's right.
And so unless you've got something really important to say and transact, you don't waste their time, and you know, at all.
You have a session to attend. Let me ask you a question for the next 30 seconds. If you can give me an answer, are you as optimistic on India as you were the last time we spoke, which was around December last year?
Yes, I am, because I am a gradualist, and I do think sometimes you've got to do executive action, but you want to make it sort of more solid. Because if it's pure executive action, or the new government coming in can reverse it without difficulty, and that is a problem. So I think basically the Prime Minister has taken a good decision, along with his, to reach out and to try and make sure that the reforms that he's planning on GST get cemented through legislative action in the Rajya Sabha. And if it involves smiling and pretending, you're the greatest and so on and so forth.
Let's do it. So be it. So be it.
And actually his whole attitude to opening up to US was the same thing.
That's right.
He was denied the visa.
True.
And
Yes.
so on, but let's get on. And I think that's a part of the Gujarati DNA also to some extent.
It's a smart DNA, if I
No,
may.
big in the sense that Gujaratis can also be cussed and inflexible, as we know
That's
from
right, yes.
people like Moraji Bhai and so on. But I think basically it's an accommodating culture. It tends to produce results and get along with life, because that's also a mercantile culture.
Fair
It's
point.
also the culture of Narsi Mehta and so on. So I think that is what
He's
I
doing.
think he's very good at. And I like that part. There's no, in a sense, it's like Mandela. Mandela had no bitterness.
That's right.
And the Prime
You've got to move on as
and
the Prime
Minister
Minister.
has no bitterness.
Fair point.
I've met him many times. I've never noticed anything.
That's an optimistic
viral.
note to end this interview on. We'll, of course, watch you in
Thank
your
you
session.
so
Thank you
much.
very much for speaking to us.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.